happy Wednesday. Thank you so much for tuning in and for choosing to spend some of your time with me. I'm Maria Milagros, a speaker, author, and a coach. And this is Wisdom Wednesday, a little space I like to share tips, tools, techniques, nuggets, learning moments, and opportunities, right? And I hope that you're having a happy Wednesday. I hope that you're having a happy August so far. It's only 3 days in, right? And even if you're dealing with a challenging or difficult time or situation, I hope that you're giving yourself the opportunity to have spaces of happiness and joy because, much like the Mary Poppins song, a spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down, right? It helps the medicine go down. So when we give ourselves spaces to have happiness and joy, we also give ourselves the opportunity to find clarity and solution because we've given ourselves a break from the challenging situation or time, which then helps us better able to deal with, solve, overcome the challenging situation or time. Anyways, I digress. I wanted to talk to you today about this idea that we need to justify or validate where we are, the good that's happening in our lives, or maybe the not so good that's happening in our lives, right? And here's what I mean. I recognized a couple of years ago that I had this really bad habit of constantly justifying, explaining, validating my position, my requests, my whatever. And I recognized that for me, it started from a very young age, first of all. I noticed that my mother would always, when we went to places and she would make a request or ask for something, they would, why do you need that? Well, why can't you afford this? Well, why? And it was always like those kinds of really personal probing questions. And I believe that she believed that in the position that she was in as a woman of color, she needed to justify her position and validate, and here's all the pointers of why X, Y, and Z in order to get a resource, right? And so watching that, I learned that behavior. And then I moved out of my mom's home when I was 17 years old. So when I would go places and they would say, well, why? Well, where's your mother? Well, what about this? Well, oh my God, I have to explain myself again. So I found that I was always being questioned, and I'm sure that it was because I was so young, and also I'm sure that there was some other biases involved as well. But because I was always being questioned, I started becoming preemptively like justifying myself, right? So as soon as I would make the request, I would follow it up right away with all the justification. I would follow it up right away with validating the points and the reasons, right? If the technology existed, I probably would have had like a presentation available or a PowerPoint. Here's why. And I find that a couple of years ago, I realized I'm doing this all the time, even when it's not asked, even when it's not needed. So if you find yourself in a similar situation, I want to give you a couple of tips, and that worked for me. One of the practices that I teach my clients is this thing called ADA, Awareness, Decisions, and Actions. You become aware of what's happening. You make a decision about what you want to do with that. If what you become aware of works for you, it's helping you thrive, the decision to continue to do that and take action accordingly. If what you recognize that you're aware of is not helping you thrive, it's actually stifling you in some way, then the decision should be to move the needle and take action accordingly that moves the needle, even if it's 1 degree at a time. And awareness is really great, but it's not as powerful as taking action accordingly, right? So in this case, we're going to use that same kind of technique or skill. I had to acknowledge that this is something that I was doing all the time. I had to acknowledge that I was constantly in a space of needing to justify and validate myself. And that felt really incongruent with who I wanted to be as a person and wanting to live an authentic life. Like there's something to be said about the vulnerability of, sharing, but there's also something to be said about oversharing because I believed, or even still, I'm a full-grown adult and I still get questioned, why do you need that? Why this? Why that? Right? So here's what I realized. The first thing is to acknowledge that it's something that I do, right? So we have to acknowledge this is something that I do, and it probably stems from my childhood. You don't always necessarily need to know exactly the root, but you need to know that the root exists, right? And it probably stems from my childhood. I can pinpoint it. The second thing that we want to do is pay attention and really start paying attention so that we can catch ourselves when we do it. So we are aware of when we are doing it, right? And that's kind of the awareness piece. The next portion, the third thing, is we really have to be intentional about changing our story. I do not want to have to justify or validate or give 1,000 points as to why I'm doing what I'm doing or how I landed where I landed, or even something as simple as like taking a half day, right? And I remember I said to someone, oh yeah, I'm taking well, it must be nice to take a half day. And then I felt like I had to validate my half day by pointing out that I worked 2 12-hour days. Why? Why do I have to do that? First of all, I should not have to. And secondly, it's none of your damn business, right? So I had to change my story. What is the story that I want to live congruently with? And for me, it's this freedom and ease of not needing to validate myself. I had to change that story. And then I had to actually be intentional about changing my words. So I had created for myself, because y'all know I love my affirmations, I created for myself a list of affirmations that really reinforced this new story and this desire to live congruently without having to justify or explain myself. And that's the decision piece, right? I made a new decision, I created a new story, and I created affirmations, like actual, tangible things that I can read over and over to rewrite the old programming and the old momentum that I had been living for so long. And then for the action piece, what I did was I made sure that I reinforced my affirmations over and over and over again. I continued to pay attention so that I can catch myself, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. And I would ask friends and family to support me and say, if you catch me doing this, like give me a signal or something, because I need to stop doing this, right? So those were ways that I took action to reinforce the decision from the awareness and the acknowledgement of what I was doing. Okay. The other thing that I want to also share is that when I do catch myself, I do this thing where I will either say out loud, I don't need to justify or validate my position or myself or my requests. If you cannot provide me with that service, that's fine. I'm going to go someplace else. And just like literally say it out loud. And that really made me feel like I was standing in my power. The second thing that you could do is know when you're sharing to connect, right? This is really about intuition and paying attention. When are you sharing to connect and when are you sharing to validate? Because sometimes sharing to connect could be really powerful. And then the third thing is I would sometimes be in the middle of explaining or validating myself and then stop and say, I don't need to validate myself. And the other person would be like, no, you don't. And I'll say, yeah, I'm catching myself. I'm in this process. And they just kind of give me a minute. And I'm saying it out loud, but I'm just kind of owning the process that I'm in, regardless of who's around me, because my goal is to be congruent, right? So I would do that. So those are those three things. One more thing that I do want to mention, kind of off to the side, but still related, is that initially when I would catch myself doing it, it was days later. And then it was hours later. And now when I do it, because I still do, I'm rewriting a program since I was 17. When I do it, it's literally in the moment, right? Most of the time I'm not doing it anymore. I'm replaying like, don't do it, don't justify. So I stopped myself before, but sometimes I do. I'll slip into justifying and then I catch myself in the moment. So it is a process. I just want to be clear that it is a process. It's not going to happen overnight that you go from always needing to justify and validate yourself to being completely confident and not needing to do that. And in the transition in that process, you might experience a little bit of guilt because we're so used to justifying, not because there's a true need for guilt, but because we're so used to justifying. When we stop doing something that we're so used to doing, there's some guilt involved. And that's a totally normal part of the process. Use your story, your words, your affirmations to create a shift in those spaces as well. All right, so that's what I have for you. I hope this was helpful for someone. If you yourself found it helpful, give it a thumbs up, share it, send it to a friend that you think would also benefit. Maybe you can find a partnership with a friend or a family member that you guys can do this together, right? Subscribe to my channel. I don't know, holla at your girl. I'm taking new coaching clients. Yeah, that's all I got. I'm sending you love and light and space and ease and happiness and joy, because damn it all, you deserve it. Period. Peace.